Well, thank you for all sitting down so quickly. It really doesn't always happen, so it's a great start. Thank you. Well, good morning and welcome to the Women for the Environment Breakfast, proudly brought to you today by Bush Heritage Australia. My name is Gemma Acton and it is my great pleasure to be your event host for today. And you know that I'm telling the truth when I say that because today is my birthday and I don't do anything I don't want to do on my birthday. Oh, thanks. Especially not at 7 o'clock in the morning. So no, I'm here because I really want to be here, like I'm sure all of you do as well. I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we're meeting today. Oh, great. We've our next speaker, who's due to start in 30 seconds, just showing up, so things are really moving in the right direction. But yes, I would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and particularly extend a special welcome to any First Nations person who is with us today in the room. And we do appreciate and respect the enduring relationship that they have with their lands and waters and recognise that the environments and landscapes which we are all working to protect, and indeed which we're here to discuss today, are on lands that have never been ceded in this country. And to hear more on this and a further perspective from somebody much closer to the subject matter, it is my pleasure to welcome to the stage Wiradjuri woman Yvonne Weldon AM to perform our Welcome to Country today.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know about that one. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, sisters and brothers, all genders and identities. As was said, my name is Yvonne Weldon. I am a Wiradjuri woman from Cowra, here in New South Wales. From the waters of the Clare, which later became known as the Lachlan, and of the Murrumbidgee rivers. I am a representative of the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council, who are the culture authority under the Aboriginal Land Rights Act for the land this building is standing on. I would like to pay my respects to all elders past and present, to all First Nations, to you and the ancestors of the lands that you've travelled from. Welcome to country isn't just words. It is a reflection of where we are. Not this modern day structure, but the continuous link of life, lessons, purpose, and nurturing supplies. The boundaries of our traditional owners are not defined by the hand and by the pen, but through the natural landscapes of the earth. The Eora Nation's country covers the Hawkes River in the north, the Nepean in the west, and the Georges River in the south. On behalf of the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council, the elders, and the members, I welcome everyone to the lands of the Gadigal. I acknowledge Gadigal people whose spirits and ancestors will always remain with this land, our Mother Earth. Wherever you travel across this beautiful continent of ours, understand you entering the lands of nations, tribes and clans, existing here for over 65,000 years. The First Nations of this land are the most resilient, unique and sustainable people on the planet. We are the world's oldest continuously living culture. Traditionally across these lands and these waterways, we traded and we shared. For necessity and not for empires. Our sharing and our trading brought our people together. It created our sustainability, encouraging our innovation, keeping our ancient practices alive for our future and for everyone's future. There are many Aboriginal warriors that have crossed this land before all of us, creating pathways before there were any. And to give respect and honour, could you all please pause for a moment to remember the many sacrifices that have been made along the way, the ones we'll continue to make, and those we shouldn't have to. As you connect, learn and share today, tomorrow and beyond, continue to learn from my people's ancient practices. As across this country, there are earth materials that represent in the peoples and the lands as it varies in culture and as it does in practices, just as it does in various colours, textures and climates. These earth byproducts are extensions of rich and sustained connections, moulded together, ingrained by the first people's blood, spirit and life. We don't live in isolation of body, culture, spirit, land and water, because we are one. From the elements of the continent of the past to become the products of each and every one of us that we depend on now and into our future. So don't lose sight of the important work that still needs to be done to bring my people, your people, and all of our peoples together. Don't live regretting what we should have done, but create the legacy of what must be done. Let's make real changes and not just symbolic ones, creating an inclusion, an acceptance, and a resilience. All of us together can bring about positive changes to multiple generations. So whether you think about the land, my people's culture, this country's history, or the devastating impacts of past and current times, or even the resilience of each and every one of us, know that the answers to everything in this country should always commence with the voice of Aboriginal people first, because we are the first people of this country. We cannot start to heal if we are not recognised and if we are not walking together. Think about the difference you can make today and what was not done last year on October 14. What we now need to continue to do, working together, by walking together, to begin and truly make a difference for an all-inclusive future. We need to create our legacy through our healing. And being here for this breakfast, I know there's some men in the room, but for women, it's important to recognise the women that make a difference. We do so because we do for so many others, for us and for everyone. And when I'm here amongst women, I always go back to the many staunch women in my life that have changed and shaped so much for me. And I think about the 2018 NAIDOC theme, because of her, we can. We can because of you. So let us all draw upon my people's spirits as we continue on our journey. May my people's spirits walk with you and guide you as we strive forward for us all. Again, on behalf of the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council, Ninyini, Nala, Wongan, Maori, Bajari, Gadi, Nurda, welcome to Gadigal. This always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Thank you and have a wonderful day.
Yvonne, thank you for such an eloquent and unifying message which really sets the tone for today. We are here today to pay tribute to the importance of strong leadership in protecting and enhancing our beautiful natural world, and also to shine a spotlight on the importance and value of women's voices and influence in this space. And to follow up on Yvonne mentioning the men in the room, it is fantastic to see a room full of women supporting other women, but it's also always really encouraging when you see men backing women's initiatives as well. So thank you to everyone for being here today. The turnout in this room is strong not only in number, it's a really impressive turnout, I must say. I do a lot of events, and I was just saying to Megan, the organiser, earlier, that the cost of living crisis has really started to bite. So when you see a room full of people, you know that they all really want to be here. So thank you for being here. But it is also a really strong turnout in breadth. We have representation here from right across the corporate, government and environment sector. And that's why we're here, to facilitate that cross-sector collaboration. If we get together, if we listen to each other, if we learn from each other, we have a much greater chance of pushing nature higher up the strategic agenda, and that's obviously what we are here to do. We've seen that for a long time now, climate change and net zero have been centre stage. They've done a great job of encouraging people to get animated about that topic. But nature is increasingly moving into the spotlight as well, which is a fantastic thing, and really helped along by the Biodiversity Conference for COP15 back in 2022. We're going to hear a lot today about the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. For anyone who's not, we're going to be calling it TNFD from now on. That is a framework which highlights both the dependence on and the impacts of business when it comes to nature, and the inextricable link between nature and risk in the financial system. Now, this framework does have the power to drive systemic change, and also to, very importantly, direct financial flows towards corporate activities that support nature after many decades in which nature was really given a backseat or completely disregarded. We are already seeing, very encouragingly, mind shifts start to shift, with a growing recognition that nature risk is indeed financial risk and therefore must be a strategic risk management priority for all businesses. At this point in time, more than half of the world's economic output is either moderately or highly dependent on nature, and therefore we know that this needs to be something that finance and business starts to take really seriously if they're not already. One problem is that it is very tricky to assess the impact of business activities on nature. When it comes to climate, it's a bit more simple. It's mostly looked at in terms of CO2, at least that gives us something measurable that's understandable to the everyday audience. When it comes to nature, we have so many different areas we need to consider. There's biodiversity, waste, pollution, water, and each of these metrics has a different way of being measured, tracked, and reported. So it is going to take some time to understand the gaps in data that we have, how much we need to upskill staff to collect and report the pertinent information. It's going to take time to develop processes. It's going to take time to enable the kind of collaboration that brings all stakeholders together to complete these accurate disclosures. The trouble is, while I say it takes time to do all of these things, we might not have the luxury of time. The TNFD right now is a voluntary market-led initiative, but it, or something like it, could very well become mandatory before too long. So now is the time, not tomorrow, to start understanding the complexities surrounding the challenge of reporting on and understanding the link between business and nature. Companies must define how they assess, prioritise, measure risk, track their impacts and their dependencies on nature. And this in itself, just the simple fact that we're all paying attention to how do we cope with this problem, is a key step moving towards creating a nature-positive future. We have a really exceptional panel this morning. I really don't say that lightly. Everyone's been very carefully hand-chosen because the women on our panel are not only very passionate about this topic, but they are true market-leading experts in the topic, and we're going to talk to them about ways we can transform the relationship between business and nature. We're going to stop for breakfast very, very shortly, but before then, I would like to introduce to the stage the CEO of Bush Heritage, Rachel Lowry. Thank you, Rachel.
Over millions of years, our ecosystems have evolved to support billions of diverse species. They bring an irreplaceable beauty to our world, sustain us and enliven our curiosity. Here in Australia, our unique ecosystems allow animals and plants found nowhere else in the world to thrive, one of which sparked the beginning of Bush Heritage Australia. In 1991, our founders raised the funds to purchase 2 forest blocks and prevent them from being sold and logged. A dedicated community was born, and our mission to heal and protect the bush. Over the years, Bush Heritage has grown into a leading conservation not-for-profit. Now our impact spans the continent and its waters through our vast reserve network and partnerships. We apply science and the knowledge of Australia's First Nations people to guide our actions and build resilience into our landscapes and restore habitat for precious wildlife. We see possibility far and wide and walk in harmony with First Nations people and our agricultural partners to make sure our on-ground impact is deep, collaborative and long-lived. Working from one horizon to the next, for the smallest ant and the tallest tree, for you and those who follow in your footsteps. By 2030, we are working towards an ambitious plan to deepen and double our impact. This work is made possible by our supporters. With your help, we can achieve these ambitious targets. life and our future depend on these complex ecosystems, and they depend on us.
Good morning, everybody. It's wonderful to be here with you all today on Gadigal country. Yvonne, thank you so much for your welcome. It's nice to see you again. And thank you for centering the morning and starting us off with words and attributes around compassion, inclusivity. I think they are really important words for us to kick this morning off with. And thank you, Gemma, as well, for noting that there's some change afoot and that some of these words, I'm going to go as far as to say love and care and perhaps even nurturing, were once believed to be attributes that were better left at home, not to be taken to the boardroom, not to be bringing into a situation at the executive table where we're making good decisions. And I think that is why we're all here this morning celebrating women in the environment, not because those attributes rest and sit with women alone. There's plenty of examples where that's not the case, but because there are many good studies, social scientists, organisational psychologists and those of the like, that have been able to attribute those attributes to what has been termed a more feminine leadership style. And I want to thank you all, everyone in this room who is brave enough and willing to bring those attributes to the boardroom, into the executive tables, into decision making, and to start to be champions for a different kind of better and good decision making. Because I think we could all argue that if it's good decision making right across society that's led us to where we are today, we probably wouldn't be facing the climate crisis that we're facing. Not probably, let me say that with more certainty. We wouldn't be facing a climate crisis. We wouldn't be facing a biodiversity crisis. We wouldn't be facing the food insecurity issues that we're facing, and nor many of the social justice and social equity issues. And so we do need to redefine good decision making, and I just wanted to note that they're the attributes I believe we're celebrating today, along with ambition and along with acknowledgement of that 2030 deadline that you've just heard about in that package. 2030 to many may sound like quite a while away. It's 70 months away. And if we heed the science and we listen to the advice that we're all receiving, it's an important deadline to centre ourselves behind. It's why I'm incredibly grateful to be here representing Bush Heritage today. Bush Heritage has the ambition to double and deepen our impact by 2030. Now, Bush Heritage has been a force for nature and for all those attributes that I've just mentioned, plus more, for the last 34 years. There's an incredible amount of work that's been done that so many of you in this room have been a part of and have helped support and champion and lead. We have 44 reserves around this beautiful country of ours, and each one of those reserves came about because people brought care and ambition into good decision making and said, these ecosystems, this landscape here is too precious to lose. It's under threat and we cannot let it fall. Bush Heritage at its very heart is about protecting healthy country forever. And so I wanted to just finish up by giving you some exciting news about some momentum afoot, because it may feel as though doubling and deepening by 2030 is an undertaking that may in its own right just not quite be achievable, but it's very achievable if we walk together. And on that note, just this year alone, Bush Heritage acquired, thanks to the support of our incredible major donors, Gifts in Wills, volunteers, all of our supporters, we acquired our largest acquisition and reserve ever in Evelyn Downs. That's 235,000 hectares of underrepresented, threatened ecosystem in the Stony Plains bioregion just below Coober Pedy that is home to an incredible amount of threatened species who were just quite frankly being overlooked and are now in the care of Bush Heritage. And when I say 235,000 hectares, you're probably going, how many MCGs is that? It's larger than the size of Canberra, larger than the size of the ACT. It's significant. So the ambition is building and we are together achieving great things. Soon after that acquisition, due to an incredible gift in will legacy, we were able to secure the Sandstrom block in Victoria, which actually provides connectivity to 2 existing reserves in the Karakara Wedderburn in Victoria. We're talking beautiful, ancient woodlands with woodland bird species that are declining at a rapid rate and require more protection and more investment, more care and better decision making across that landscape. We're able to bring that now by connecting those 2 reserves and actually starting to create more movement across landscapes, which we're going to need to see more of if we're going to rise to the challenges of this warming context. And I'll leave you with this next conservation win that we hope to achieve with all of your support and more. I am very excited to let you all know that next Wednesday we are going to launch a campaign to try to secure a landscape in the Fitzsterling Ranges in Western Australia, a globally significant biodiversity hotspot that sits between 2 national parks and a number of reserves that Bush Heritage and other environmental groups have patiently been working on and acquiring over the years in an effort to connect this incredible habitat corridor. Unfortunately, the name may not work in our favour, so I'm going to need you all to get out there for us next Wednesday and make sure that nobody is left uncertain that there is nothing dodgy about Dodgy Downs, because that is the name of the next reserve to come into our care at Bush Heritage. And I would like to just encourage you all to take a look. It's a big undertaking. But here's the thing, better decision making requires us to be bold and ambitious in these times. It requires us to hold space for others, have these difficult conversations that we need to have, and it requires us to take time to show gratitude for what we've achieved to date. So again, thank you all for those that have supported Bush Heritage. Thank you to ANZ for making this morning happen. Thank you to our past president, Chris Grubb, who's in the room and given more than a decade of his life in laying a lot of the foundations that we are celebrating today. Thank you to Gemma for coming on your birthday. Thanks again, Yvonne. And thank you to you all. Cheers to healthy country protected forever. Cheers.
Rachel, thank you for such a rousing and empowering speech. It's really fantastic to hear about the momentum behind Bush Heritage at the moment. It certainly sounds like it's expanding and growing in all the right ways. I'm sure many of us think we're incredibly busy. As a working mother of 2 under 2, I do as well, but wait till you hear the title of our next speaker, then we'll put it all in perspective for us. We have Trish Doyle, MP, Member for Blue Mountains, Assistant Minister for Environment, Heritage, Climate Change and Energy. If we could please welcome Trish to the stage. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and start your breakfast. It's an absolute honour to be invited to come along this morning. Happy birthday, Gemma. Thank you very much, Rachel, for setting such a positive tone. And I always think the beginning of a day that has Yvonne talking to us is going to be a good day. So thank you, Yvonne, for welcoming us to country. Who am I and why have I been asked to come along today? I'm very proud and privileged to be elected in 2015 as the member for Blue Mountains, and just last year to be asked by the Premier and the Minister to step into the role of Assistant Minister on those gigantic portfolio areas: environment, climate change, heritage and energy. I am a keen environmentalist and I'm a member of the Blue Mountains Unions Council. And as I was raising my two boys, who are now adults, they were quite young. As a sole parent on a casual teacher's wage, I stepped into the local Member of Parliament's office because I needed a second job to pay the rent and the bills. When he retired and suggested that I put my hand up to run for election, some of you won't be surprised that I was told, listen, your hair's a bit messy, you won't be told what to do or say, you're really good working in the background, supporting male politicians, you don't look the part, you look like a tree-hugging hippie. You just stay in the Blue Mountains supporting a candidate that we'll choose. And I remember standing up and saying, one day your description of a tree-hugging hippie will have you sat down and watch me. I think it's important that in our parliaments and as we make policy, enact policy for the people of New South Wales, that those people who are making those decisions represent the communities we're from. So really proud to be a member of a government that has 42% representation of women in our parliament and 50% of our cabinet are ministers. The two women in charge in New South Wales for climate change, environment, heritage and energy are women. And we are challenged each day as women around decision making. And so when I was asked to turn up at a breakfast on a Friday morning after a long sitting week, and there's another sitting week next week, I said, what's it for? Women for the environment. I said, I'm there. But it was beautiful to walk in this morning and see bush tracks. And this afternoon I'll be off on a bush track in the beautiful World Heritage listed Blue Mountains and absorbing some of what we hear today. I never turn up to these things with a 17-page speech that the department prepares for me because we are not the experts. So many of you here in the room, whether it's government, whether it's business, whether it's the non-profit sector, but those who work in the environment sector, those people, you, Bush Heritage and all of the supporters, you are the experts, so I'm here to listen today and take what I learn back to the Premier and the Minister. I often think, and I'm sure you would agree with me, that government is often 5 steps behind what's actually happening in the community, and your expectations are often mixed with frustration that we're not moving fast enough. And I want to acknowledge that that's most likely the case. So I look forward to hearing what you suggest that government needs to do to step into that space to move us forward today. I just want to acknowledge too, for women, the world is focused, and rightly so at the moment, on gendered violence and the challenges that we face in changing attitudes. My lifelong work has been in the area of prevention of domestic violence, but I'm so relieved to be actually working in the environment climate change space, I can tell you. As Yvonne and Rachel reminded us, the significant attributes that we need to focus on at the moment around caring for our environment, protecting that environment for the future, are the attributes of love, care and compassion. Now, of course, a member of the government wouldn't be allowed to stand up here and just talk about those few component parts that brought me here, but it is important to talk about some of the achievements to date. So as you eat your brekkie, I'll just cover off a few of those. I won't go through the 17-page speech, I promise. So we have just passed the year mark of being elected to government. The Men's Labor team are now almost halfway there on our 2030 renewable generation target and over a quarter of the way there on our long duration storage target. We've made the successful delivery of the roadmap a whole of government priority, not just sitting in that portfolio. And we're working across government to remove barriers so we can deliver renewable energy projects. We're getting transition back on track, and within our first year in government, we approved the first wind farm in New South Wales in 2.5 years. Last year, I had the very great honour of introducing the Climate Change Net Zero Future Act 2023 into the Legislative Assembly as the Assistant Minister. And that legislates a really ambitious approach to addressing climate change and enshrines whole of government climate action to deliver net zero by 2050. Some of you will be thinking that's not soon enough, and I agree. But the Act is the first climate legislation in New South Wales, and it's the first legislation in any state or territory to establish a strong, independent, expert net zero commission. It's also the first legislation in Australia to refer to the right to a clean, healthy and sustainable environment. The New South Wales Government legislated that Act with cross-party support in December 2023. I think it was one of those sittings, through the night where you wake up to the bells ringing for a division and realise that it's 6 in the morning. And the couches in Parliament, contrary to what you might have heard, are not very comfortable. Look, the Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water, DQ, is supporting the establishment of the Net Zero Commission by the middle of this year. I have got notes here on the work that we're doing to protect Aboriginal cultural heritage, and making sure that we deliver new standalone legislation in that space. Some of the environmental priorities around our national parks, so upgrading visitor infrastructure that encourages people to appreciate nature, but also in a way that protects that nature. Funding more frontline staff for national parks and wildlife, establishing the Great Koala National Park, adding more property to the National Park estate. I've got information here all about the work that we're doing to protect koalas and the establishment of advisory groups. So it's not just advisors in Minister's office who make these decisions, but people who work on the ground with wildlife. So habitat protection, the Great Koala National Park, environmental protection, building what was once slashed in our National Parks and Wildlife Service, protecting Aboriginal cultural heritage, climate change. There's a lot of really significant achievements and steps towards a better world. But I'll go back to the point that I made just quickly, that it is incumbent on you and the work you do with the organisations that you're committed to hold us to account. So you hear statements this morning, and I hope that some of you might reflect on some of what I've said and reach out to your local Member of Parliament or to the Premier or to the Minister or to myself and saying, hey, you talked about this a few months ago. What are you doing about that? Where are you up to? We have to work hand in glove. And it's a challenge, but our younger generations depend on us, as Rachel said, to be brave, to be ambitious, to care, to step into that world of protecting our environment. Many years ago, when my life turned upside down and myself and my little boys were dealing with the suicide of their father, I made a decision to move to a community that was in the bush, a community that would wrap its arms around us, a space where we could step outside a home and wander through the bush and be enriched. That has been my solace. Walking amongst trees, standing and looking for considerable time and listening to a waterfall. So as I've moved through my life, I never planned or imagined that I'd be elected to represent my community. But it absolutely is the conservation of our bush that has driven me, and especially when someone told me that a tree-hugging hippie with wild, crazy hair could never stand in our New South Wales Parliament. Have a great morning.
Keep eating, thank you. Trish, thank you so much. That it was great to hear about the initiatives that are taking place, many of which I'm sure were new news to us. But also, I feel that many in the room would relate to being consistently underestimated and proving everyone wrong, and also the solace that we find in nature, particularly when times are tough and when we turn to it. We are going to take a breakfast and networking break now. Just two quick things. There are two QR codes on your table. The first on your menus will show you where everybody in the room is sitting. So please do check out who you know, who you'd like to meet, and work your way around to see everyone. And secondly, on the Bush Heritage flyer, there is a QR code which allows you to donate. We heard from Rachel about the incredible momentum behind Bush Heritage at the moment. So anything you can contribute would be very gratefully received. And to that end, I would suggest maybe during the break we play that incredible video again, because it was beautiful, but also I don't know how anyone can say no to that little marsupial at the end with the big eyes. Embarrassed, I don't know what it is, but I will ask someone after this. Very quickly, we do have a great prize draw this morning. Don't worry, you're already automatically entered into it. At 10 o'clock we'll be drawing that. But for the time being, nothing to do but enjoy your breakfast and a little bit of networking. We'll see you back here at 8:35. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I hope you had a lovely breakfast and a chance to chat to everyone. And as mentioned, we have a very impressive and carefully curated panel here with us today. I'd like to introduce firstly Alex Banks, partner at EY in Climate Change and Sustainability Services. Alex here in the green. We have Sally Townsend, the Head of Sustainability at Blackmores Group, in the middle. And we have Mila. Yes, sorry, I didn't know if it was Mila or mine. Mila Cerecina, an Executive Director at Pollination, and while we're very grateful for all of them for being here today, Mila stepped in at literally the 11th hour when a colleague of hers had to dash overseas, so very, very grateful that she could make it. All right, listen, I'm going to start off with one question to set the scene that I'm going to ask to all three of you. Alex, we'll start with you. Where does your passion come from? Why is it that you're just so passionate about protecting the environment to the extent that you've devoted your careers and much of your lives towards this at the moment?
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. Hello, everyone. Good morning. So I grew up in Armidale in regional New South Wales. I often joke, because I now live in Melbourne, that I'm from the not good Armidale, the one in New South Wales, not the fancy Armidale in Melbourne. But I would actually argue Armidale in New South Wales is the good one. And I spent a lot of time as a young kid in and around the national parks around Armidale. There's a beautiful Dangar's Gorge, if anyone's been around there, Wallamombi, the Point Lookout National Park, etc., Cathedral Rock. And I was forced as a child to do lots and lots of bushwalks with my dad and my family, and while at the time I resented it very deeply and would negotiate closely with him about how long the walk could be and exactly how much time we had to spend in nature, it actually really instilled a very, very deep love and deep passion for nature, which has kind of carried me through my career. I was actually born in Tassie and spend a lot of time down in Tasmania with my family now. And the special wild places that we have in this country generally, but also particularly in Tasmania, is something that I feel so strongly about. I started my career working for the federal government in the Department of Agriculture in international forest policy, and I kind of fell into it a little bit. I got into the department because I was really interested in food security. That was kind of at the back end of the very long drought, just before the climate wars started, when I was optimistic about regulation on climate change and saving the planet, and I wanted to go and work on food security and ended up in forestry policy. And because of that job, I actually got to travel around to forests all over the world working on deforestation and have just absolutely fallen in love with them. And everyone that knows me knows that I'm obsessed with forests, and I talk about forests and trees all the time. And the idea that I now get to do it as my day job, talking to clients and government about why we need to protect and restore nature, is just such a privilege, and I don't take it for granted.
I'm actually from Armidale, Victoria.
The good Armidale.
Well, I mean, we do have like trams and nice cafes, but we certainly don't have any of those beautiful natural features that you mentioned. So I completely understand why you feel very passionately about your Armidale. I'm not about to defend my Armidale. But it is wonderful to hear how truly you do love your job and how you have managed to combine that natural passion with progress in that space. Sally, let me hand over to you.
Well, yeah, no, thanks, Gemma. I've been working for more than 20 years for a healthcare company. And, when you look at, there's about 50,000 herbs that are used therapeutically, and 15,000 of them at the moment are faced with extinction. And sort of moving over to our pharmaceutical counterparts, about half of prescribed drugs come from wild sources. So I think there's this knowledge that the climate crisis and nature loss is before all else a health crisis. So that's really what started a lot of our interest in this area. But along the way, I think there's been this realisation, that feels incredibly relevant, being Mother's Day weekend, that by the time my kids are my age, we're going to have 9 billion people living on a planet with only enough natural resources to meet the needs of 1 billion people. And so I think that's got to be really motivating as far as what is it that we can do and mobilise at the moment in order to make sure that isn't the future that we want for our kids.
Sally, I might just stop you. Just during the break now, I asked you how you got into this. And I think it's really eye-opening to hear how recently, as the head of sustainability, it became apparent that this was a necessary thing. So maybe you could just do a quick recap of the story you told me at breakfast.
Yeah, sure. Jonathan Porritt, who's quite a well-known influencer in the UK, that's had a lot to do with advising government on more aggressive climate targets. He was due to come out to Australia to speak at an event, and obviously couldn't travel because of the restrictions. And so he did sort of like a late night retelling of what he was going to say. And sort of at the end, when he'd gone through, there was a question from the audience that said, all right, well, we've got our climate targets now, and we've got our net zero plans in place, and we're working on credible transition plans. What else should we be doing? And he said, if you're a company and you're not looking at the biodiversity crisis strategically, intentionally, very deliberately and aggressively, then you're not going to be in business in the future. So you really need to get moving around it. And then when we're all sitting at home, the Sydney Morning Herald ran this cartoon that was from a cartoonist, Graham Mackay, and it was 4 waves basically, and the first wave, like tsunami sort of style waves, and the first wave was the pandemic or the COVID-19, the second wave was the collapse of the economy, the third bigger wave was climate change, and then the fourth one, which just overcame all of the others, was biodiversity loss.
That was just so recent, just during COVID times. So it's extraordinary how much has moved up the agenda already. Mila, why is protecting nature personally important to you?
Thanks, Gemma. I spent a good deal of my couple of decades long career working in social justice and human rights and sort of protecting people, if you will, and the sort of things that make us thrive. And one of the things that became apparent over the course of my career is that you can't be for people if you're not protecting the ecosystems and the settings in which we are living. The climate crisis, the nature crisis, they impact our well-being and our ability to thrive as humans. And I think some of the things that really brought it home for me, experts believe that we're in the middle of a 6th mass extinction event. You know, the extinction rates of our ecosystem, of our biodiversity, are 100 to 1,000 times the estimated background extinction rate over the past tens of millions of years. In 2022, it was estimated that 1.75 Earths would be required in order to renew everything that humanity demands from nature. And obviously the New South Wales Biodiversity Outlook report just came out this week, and 50% of the listed threatened species are expected to be extinct within 100 years. These are just really dramatic statistics. That's, thinking about your curves, that sort of final one that's really right up here. And so, for me, being motivated to support the economy that supports us, the health that supports us, and just the ability to thrive that supports us. Addressing nature just seems absolutely critical, so that those background conditions that allow us to frankly live are still in place and allow us to pursue a good, healthy life. As the Bush Heritage motto goes, healthy country, protected forever. Protecting country is about protecting ourselves and our own well-being too. So that's kind of where my motivation comes. I'm for people, and that means being for nature.
Very sobering statistics indeed. We are in a very enlightened room when it comes to understanding the importance of biodiversity. More broadly, Mila, out there in the community and in the business world, are we seeing organisations already bring nature into the agenda and move it up, or are they still lagging?
Yeah, absolutely. I believe we are starting to see that emerging, particularly in the last 6 to 12 months. We're seeing a lot more businesses pay attention and start to wrap around what this agenda means. I think nature sort of started out its life in the corporate world as a corporate social responsibility sort of concern. I think that's where it sort of used to be positioned, but I think there's a lot more awareness now that it's the cause of a serious financial risk for business. Having clean air, having clean water, having fertile soil is really essential for our businesses to thrive, for our economy to thrive, and for shareholder value. So I think at the outset, what we're seeing is much more of an orientation around risk management, so strategic risk management. I think over time, what we're going to see is much more of an orientation around embedding nature within one strategy and thinking creatively about seizing opportunity. And I think, an example of sort of managing on the risk side, 3M, one of the conglomerates in the US, recently had a $10 billion settlement to settle some water pollution claims related to forever chemicals, and it's just an astounding sort of sum of money, and their shareholder value was halved. So managing risk is already really kind of clear, I think, in people's mind. But taking up opportunity, I think, is going to be the next wave of attention that corporates are going to start paying attention to. Microsoft is investing in technology that helps us analyse the condition of marine ecosystems. That's good for ecosystems, that's good for Microsoft. Caring, who we were talking about over breakfast, is investing in sort of the landscapes in its ecosystems, in its supply chain systems, and that's good for those landscapes, it's good for their supply chain. So I think we're going to see that transition over time from CSR where it started, risk where we kind of are now, and then sort of seizing opportunity over time.
Some research that we ran about 18 months ago with the top 60 companies who recognise as well the importance of getting onto nature. The 3 biggest things that are holding them back, or there actually were 4, but I feel like it's becoming less of an issue. The first is lack of capability. They can't solve a problem when they don't really understand it. The second was capacity. The third was freeing up the resources to do it well. And then the last one were gaps in the data. But I really feel like some of those data gaps are starting to be filled, and definitely the lack of data shouldn't be enough to stop progress. I think that of all of those 4 challenges is the one that can be solved with workarounds, and there is actually, but the first 3, capability, capacity and competing for resources, are really significant challenges for the corporate community making the progress that we need to.
Let's talk about the tools available to help corporates. We mentioned earlier the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, the TNFD. Alex, how does this risk management framework help companies?
Yeah, so maybe just one quick comment as well around the kind of momentum recently, but the history of environmentalism within corporate and financial institutions, many people in this room will know that companies have been dealing with their relationship with nature in various ways since the beginning of time, particularly primary industries, so mining companies, property companies, agricultural companies. They understand nature very well. They understand that relationship with nature, but historically it's been quite a focus on compliance. So what are we permitted to do? What is the level of exploitation that we can undertake? What is within the bounds of the law, etc. And I think what is happening now is that there is a real evolution of understanding that it is not just about compliance anymore, as I think Trish pointed out very, very well, and I'm glad that you did it, was that we have a lag regulatory environment around natural systems in this country and globally. So that kind of closing that gap between community and social expectation, the needs of nature itself, and what is regulatory and what is controlled is kind of what's happening right now. And that's really where the TNFD has come from, is a recognition that what is permissible is not aligned with what is needed, both from the environment and also from investors and other financial institutions who are managing risk. So managing risk around things like social expectations and reputational risk, but actually much more kind of nuts and bolts, black and white financial risks. So, credit risk, liquidity risk, market risk, etc. That the understanding now is of a connection much more closely to that. And so the TNFD has very intentionally aligned quite closely with the structure and the framing and the architecture that has been created around climate risk. So encouraging organisations to think about how what was kind of historically an externality can become a material risk and impact for an organisation. And the TNFD does go slightly beyond the TCFD in some senses of encouraging organisations to think of this concept of an impact and dependency, which is what you have described, an impact and dependency on nature and how that can transform into a material risk and opportunity. So the TNFD kind of came into force or was formally released in September last year. In January, a number of companies globally, just over 300 companies, signed up to be early adopters of the TNFD. And what that essentially means is organisations can start to do the work that they had done in the past around climate change. So, mapping out the value chain, thinking about where the impacts and dependencies on nature exist, thinking about how that can turn into risks and opportunities, and then ultimately disclosing, because it is a voluntary set of recommended disclosures. So companies will be starting to put disclosures out into the market to say, this is where we are dependent on nature, this is where we're impacting on nature, and this is how it could manifest as a material financial risk or opportunity for us.
Quick follow-up, 300 globally. How about in Australia? Is it we first movers, a bit behind the game?
I would say we are a little bit behind the game, to be honest. We're underrepresented in that number. The biggest concentration of companies, interestingly, is in Japan, and not to give a plug to another consulting company, but actually one of your colleagues released a really interesting paper yesterday, or an article about why Japan is moving quite quickly in relation to TNFD. That was Guy. So I'd encourage people to have a look at that. But not a huge number of companies in Australia, and I think that's interesting. There are a small number, but I do think there is this need for us in Australia to recognise that we are in a very, very unique position. We are one of a small number of megadiverse countries globally. We have some of the most important biodiversity in this country, some of the most at-risk biodiversity, and we are also a developed economy. We're an OECD country. And what that means is that the expectation and onus on us is greater than other countries in this space. Corporates in Australia need to move fast here, and the expectation and the focus is going to be on Australia as a first mover. And I would just really encourage all of the corporates and financial institutions in the room to see that as a massive opportunity to set a global ambition. The world is going to be looking to us of how we can start to protect and restore and regenerate nature in this country, and we can set a global standard. And I feel really excited about that.
Thank you. That was lovely. Mila, the TNFD, it sounds really promising insofar as concentrating a lot of minds and giving a very clear framework, but how do we move organisations from simple disclosures through to real, positive, proactive action?
Yeah, it's a super good question. I guess the way I think about it is that disclosure is kind of your entry point, your first step, that accountability and that transparency comes first. And as that starts to ramp up and a corporate starts to disclose, right, I'm having this particular impact on nature, I'm having this particular dependency on nature, that starts to prompt some questions from one stakeholder. So if you've disclosed, we really super depend on water and actually that, source of water is becoming depleted in particular ways, well, your investors are going to ask, well, what are you going to do about it? Or if you say, we're really impacting nature in this really negative way, whether it's deforestation or some other impact, well, your customers are going to say, what are you going to start to do about it? And so I think disclosure starts to sort of prompt those questions for one's stakeholders. And you can imagine over time, as more and more corporates disclose, as it becomes more mandatory, then the amount of data out there about risk starts to increase, and it starts to up the ante for ambition, and it starts to cause one to be, ranked in a way, right? There's going to be some that are going to look like they're doing better and others that are going to look like they're doing worse. And so as that more of that becomes apparent out there in the market, that's really going to start to drive ambition. So I sort of see it as like a 3-step evolution. You're going to have sort of the disclosure and accountability piece at the beginning. Then you're going to start to see companies moving towards setting some metrics and targets to start to shape their behaviour so that they're avoiding some of that risk and doing more of the positive actions. And then over time, I think we're going to see companies moving into a space where they're starting to think about, well, how do I actually align my strategy to be more nature positive? How do I start to sort of transform, in fact, what I'm doing in order to be more in sync with nature rather than causing impacts and dependencies that are negative for my business. So that's a trajectory that I think we'll start to see as you start from disclosure.
Can I just add something super quickly that we did a pilot last year of the TNFD with 23 companies and financial institutions and corporates with the federal government, and we had an advisory panel, and there was an amazing representative from the Wilderness Society on that advisory panel, and he gave some really great advice to the pilot participants when we were talking about this risk of an over-focus on reporting only, and that, as we all know, in this transition to mandatory climate reporting, it sucks up a lot of corporate energy and focus and time. So how do we make sure that all of the energy isn't going into reporting and not going into doing the doing? And he essentially said, it's actually really simple. Think about where nature is in your value chain. Think about where that precious nature is and act immediately to halt damage or loss of that nature and start to think about how you can protect and restore nature. Everything else comes from that. If we think about a nature positive future, it is a future where nature is regenerating. So everything we need to be doing now is thinking about doing less damage to nature and focusing more on restoring and regenerating nature. The reporting comes from that. That's the pursuit that we are all, in service of. So where is there precious nature in your value chain? What is happening to that nature? And what can you do to protect and restore that nature? And that has to be the ultimate priority of all of these processes.
Mila, when you talked about the trajectory that organisations will follow, some are already doing that. Sally, I know over at Blackmores, you guys are walking the talk already, bringing in TNFD, net zero, nature to the strategic agenda. Tell us how. How are you doing that? What are you doing there?
Well,
in a couple of minutes.
Yeah. Look, it does come back to that original sort of comment of you can't solve a problem if it's not well understood. So it's probably taken us a few years to really get our head around understanding those impacts and dependencies. And the reason being, we've got more than 900 ingredients that we're using. We're procuring them from 170 odd suppliers from across 36 countries. Just one of those ingredients sources from 20 farms, and some of those farms aren't the seed source. So back to, it's really easy to hear Alex go, you just start with your value chain and map it out and stop hurting nature. The reality of actually doing that is exactly the right answer, by the way, but the reality of actually doing that is incredibly complex and not easy to achieve. So we've just started by starting simply, we started with one ingredient that we partnered with Pollination Group to do a TNFD risk assessment using their LEAP framework. And we basically started from there and realised then that we needed scale, so we developed a materiality matrix, and then from that we were able to go narrow again and do another nature risk assessment on a more targeted ingredient. And now the next piece of work we'll do will actually inform a sourcing hierarchy that will help us. So it's about operationalising it. So that's just one example to say, we started by just getting started. We went in narrow, then we went broad, then we went narrow again, now we've gone broad again. And then while we're doing that...
Sorry, could you tell us, are you able to tell us what that was? That
The first ingredient we did was actually a botanical, because that was also determined to be quite risky. But the second one that we did after we've done the material ingredient was actually a marine-based ingredient. We learned a lot by being able to sort of flex. It was sort of like going to the gym for 2 years and sort of learning to flex that muscle on understanding nature. And now we're working out how to operationalise it into our business strategy. And the 6 elements that we're going in as the principles for making this work is starting with a strong vision that we're united on right across our executive leadership team, where everyone thinks this matters, not just the sustainability team. The second element of it is that this is advocated for by the leadership, so the entire leadership team, whether they're coming from finance or operations, procurement, marketing, everybody gets behind this. The third element's governance. What are the policies, the procedures that will make this live and be embedded within our business? The fourth area will be, how do we systemize it? So what data are we collecting? What are we capturing on an ongoing basis? And that'll inform the fifth area, which is transparent target setting, so that everyone knows we're measuring what matters, and we're clear and transparent on how we're progressing. And then the final ingredient, which is, I think, the easiest one to deliver with nature, is unlocking the power of your culture, because this is a really important reason why people want to work for businesses that are, do have a nature positive target. 71% of workers actually would consider a company's environmental performance before they took a role with that business. So this is at the heart of our ability to attract and retain great talent for the future as well. So we feel like, if we take that approach of having it led from the top, systemised, the right governance in place, transparently reporting, and then making sure that all of our people are on the journey, that will give us the best chance to deliver on not only a net zero future, but a nature positive future as well.
an enormous task. Where does someone, practically speaking, start? What's the very first step?
I would start the very first step, because one thing that we did, there's a tool that we developed through Climate Leaders Coalition in the last 6 months, and this was all of the companies from the Climate Leaders Coalition who'd done piloting before, having input as to what we learned from doing it. Most people had used the TNFD LEAP framework. Some people had used science-based targets for nature as their approach, but irrespective, the people that were informing it were people that had attempts at doing it. And we've recognised there's actually a big step within business that you need to do first, as far as understanding and modelling out what are your on-ramps, like your stakeholders, or some of those. Do you have disclosure requirements? What's your exposure to sustainable finance? Some of those sorts of things. The second area, mapping out your organisational boundary, like all of our nature risk is in our supply chain where we've got no operational control. So that was an important distinction for us in being able to draw an organisational boundary around our reporting. Actually will be on companies and locations that we don't own or have any operational control over. Our third sort of big consideration was in setting our geographic boundary, and as you said, we're mega diverse here, but there are 17 mega diverse regions, so how do we pick those that are most vulnerable to triage first? And then looking at our interface with nature, because we source from people who grow on the land, we don't actually do it ourselves. And then finally looking at what are the systems and the capability and the access to data within it. And once you've sort of gone through that step, then you're ready for TNFD. So the tool's called NatStart. It's free. You can just get on the Climate Leaders Coalition website to have a look at it. It definitely doesn't do TNFD. At some point, it's going to say, call Mila or Alex, because they've got... realistically, none of us have ecologists or marine biologists working in the corporate environment, nor is it feasible for us to do it in the future. So it's about understanding what we're asking for when we go and turn up with these guys and say, we actually need your help to do this next important strategic piece of work. But first of all, you just sort of need to size it up. So that's where I'd get started.
Just to add one comment to that, so much of what you have said is really catalyses this issue right now around supply chains, and so many corporations and financial institutions are grappling with this issue of transparency and traceability in supply chain. It might be because you're working on modern slavery, it might be because you're trying to do your Scope 3 emissions reduction strategies, it might be because of nature, and this challenge we have around traceability and transparency in supply chain cannot be underestimated. And I would just really encourage organisations to think about engaging very early with their procurement functions and getting the CPO as one of those really critical early ambassadors within the organisation, because without the procurement function, none of this is going to work. And actually most of the implementation and actual, action that an organisation is going to take is in that, procurement manager dealing with each of the categories where you are having a high impact, and really getting them on board and getting them as the ambassadors and champions within the organisation. So see your CPO as one of those really critical stakeholders.
Well, funnily enough, the first place we did our nature risk assessment with the Pollination team, we actually got enough data that we could do our first Scope 3 end-to-end value chain mapping, and we did a human rights assessment while we were there. So actually ended up being a 3-for-1.
Bang for your buck.
Yeah, that's right. And it really demonstrates, I think, our aha was these aren't 3 separate pieces of work. This is all one. If we're not looking at impact on climate, on nature, and on people collectively, then we misunderstood the assignment.
I think those are just really good points around like where one starts and how one starts to plan ahead. You've absolutely hit the nail on the head, thinking about the board and executive and their own awareness and understanding of this issue, getting to know your data. I mean, it's such a crucial, it sounds super boring, but such a crucial starting point just to be able to grip up what's going on in your direct operations, in your value chain. Understanding your supply chain in this area is going to be absolutely crucial. So just really want to underscore and emphasise those are such crucial starting points. I want to add a couple of other ideas as corporates enter this agenda. One is to think about complementarity. So just riffing on your final point here, the connections with climate and with people are just really important in this space. There are things that you can be doing to uplift both climate and biodiversity outcomes at the same time. So whether that's investing in nature-based carbon projects or thinking about your procurement and sustainable products, there are ways in which you can be meeting your climate targets by paying attention to nature. It's also really important to make sure that in meeting your climate targets, you're not impacting nature in a negative way. So, for example, if you're a company that's looking to get into biofuels in order to manage your own Scope 1 GHG emissions, you've got to be really careful depending on what that biofuel is, whether that's palm oil, etc., that you're not inadvertently supporting something that's going to be bad for your nature exposures. Whether that's going to cause, monoculture cropping or going to impact a food source for local communities. So just thinking about that sort of wraparound complementarity is going to be really an important place to start and going to support your climate and people agendas too. And the final thing I'd sort of put out there is thinking about how you can communicate transparently. You're not going to know everything all at once at the beginning, and you don't need to do everything all at once right now, but communicating to your stakeholders that you're paying attention to the nature positive agenda and that you have a plan of work in place can be really powerful. It can really sort of open you up to engaging with stakeholders, with First Nations communities, with the stakeholders in local communities, and having that sort of open dialogue about where you're headed and gaining their support and bringing them under your tent.
I do quite a lot of conferences with artificial intelligence, and it's very funny because it's the same issue for companies that haven't started on that journey yet. How do we get board and management buy-in? And something we always ask is, so is there a hot tip you have about something that really brings them on board, something that really appeals and speaks to them and gets them to realise, actually, this isn't a nice to have, this is a corporate necessity?
I can start, and I'm very interested to hear what your ideas on this are as well. The first observation is that I feel like over the last couple of decades, getting people on board with climate change has been quite challenging. Has been a lot of debate about climate and, is it actually a thing? I have not had that experience at all with nature with senior executives. People innately and inherently care deeply about nature, particularly in this country, but also globally. So that very first piece, which is like, this is something that you should care about, easy. one great way of doing that is, and I always try to do this, is to take people into nature to have that conversation if you can, and try to create that kind of sense of connection to nature. But the second one and the biggest question is like, we all like nature. We're all, tree-hugging hippies in this room, potentially, but what does it really mean for our business? So coming into that conversation early on with some really tangible examples of a dependency, in particular, a dependency on nature for the organisation. So we have these critical ingredients that we cannot create our products without, and those ingredients are grown in areas where nature is at risk, or soil health is declining, or water is scarce. Therefore, that could in time create a really material financial risk for us. Go in armed with some tangible examples, and to be honest, they're not hard to find. An impact or a dependency is not difficult for most organisations to identify.
And there's sometimes not things like, we're quite lucky that our ingredients, it's not hard to imagine they'd be vulnerable to nature. But at the launch of the TNFD, Tony Goldner, who is the head of that, when he stood up and spoke about it, he didn't talk about risk to bananas or fish oil or koalas. He spoke about semiconductors, which are the little chips that are in all of our technology, and most of them in the world come from Taiwan, who's being impacted at the moment by a significant drought, a worst in 100-year drought, and they put water restrictions in place. And because of the massive amounts of water you need to make a semiconductor, they haven't been able to produce them. So like $40 billion of investment went into creating a secondary hub for creating semiconductors in the world, and they did it in Arizona, which is also not known for its abundant water. But none of us could run our business without semiconductors. And, there's a great piece of work that Will Everson wrote, who's from EY in the UK, and he spoke about the exposure to nature for the automobile industry, as far as rubber for tyres and, all sorts of things like that. So I think it's important to bring it to life with a lot of storytelling. But the other thing, which is just doing straight out financial sensitivity assessment. So actually quantifying the impact on your revenues of just one scenario as it plays out, recognising that with nature it's likely that you're actually going to get omni scenarios all hitting at the same time. So how do we sort of create that impact multiplier to quantify your exposure to nature risk will really help elevate it on your board agenda.
And Alex, let me ask you, we heard from Yvonne this morning, it was very, very moving welcome to country that she gave. How do we collaborate most effectively with traditional custodians who have such a valuable knowledge and understanding, the type that, frankly, most of us could never hope to replicate because it comes from years and years of that being ingrained into them, with business imperatives? Like, how do we get the most out of that relationship?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is one of the amazing kind of evolutions that we have seen in the TNFD, is an explicit recommendation, within the governance disclosures to talk about how consideration of human rights, Indigenous peoples or First Nations peoples, and communities are impacted by the strategy of an organisation as it relates to nature. So it's an explicit call out from the TNFD that understanding that relationship with First Nations people, Indigenous people, communities, and nature and strategy is critical to doing this effectively. The reality is that is very challenging for lots of corporates and financial institutions who can sometimes be quite distant to that actual on-the-ground relationship to nature and to country that First Nations people have. And I think that probably the overarching thing that we found, particularly in the pilot testing, was that we need to kind of disrupt this idea that First Nations people are there to provide information or validation or approval to corporates and financial institutions. That it's a transactional relationship to give the green tick to doing, continuing to do what you want, and to reverse that and say, actually, as Yvonne mentioned this morning, the conversation should start with First Nations people. That takes time and significant investment. So we need to appreciate that has to come into the planning and the approaches that you might be an early adopter. And I'm very happy to say that EY is an early adopter of the TNFD, but that means that we're on the hook to disclose in 2025. And realistically, it's not going to be possible for us to engage and negotiate and discuss with First Nations people throughout our entire value chain by 2025. And this comes back to the point around transparent reporting. It is as much about saying what you don't know and what you haven't done as it is about saying what you do know and what you have done. The other point, I guess, is that we all need to be very, very conscious of placing an additional burden on already very burdened shoulders of First Nations people in this country, and thinking then about the onus is on the corporates and financial institutions to do the work, to invest, to make this not just about feel good and saying that you've kind of talked to a few people. How are you incentivizing that? How are you enabling that? Are you putting your money where your mouth is when it comes to engaging with First Nations communities? And my final point is that we often think, particularly corporates and financial institutions, just think about their little part of the universe. So, it might be one mining company adjacent to one agricultural company, adjacent to one property company, adjacent to the government, for example. But that is an area of country for a single group of Indigenous people. So the onus should be on, those other actors to come together first and say, what is our cumulative impact on this area of biodiversity, of country, of cultural value? Let us do the work and consolidate our ask and consolidate our work before we then go out, rather than going 4, 5, 10, 100 at a time to try to ask this very under-resourced, under-recognised, undervalued stakeholder of the process. So I do think we need to really disrupt this idea of the transactional relationship and the kind of tick and flick approval consent process that exists at the moment. And that's going to be quite difficult, but it's part of the very long, reconciliation journey that we're on in this country and globally with First Nations people. Thank you. Yeah.
Did you want to say something?
Super well said. And I would just encourage the group to also think about ways in which we can go beyond consultation and think about different sorts of ownership models and engagement models that are possible and on the table. So this is an example from the climate world, but Pollination is engaging in the Kimberley on a green hydrogen, on standing up a green hydrogen project, and it's actually in ownership collaboration with traditional owners in that region. And so it's not just about a project coming in and engaging and consulting, but actually in co-equal partnership with our First Nations partners. And so thinking about opportunities to do that kind of thing and to look to traditional owners for what they're already trying to achieve on their land in terms of sort of nature uplift can be a really powerful place to start.
So a complete philosophical rethink. It'll probably become easier as we see more ideas and solutions put out there by people who are thinking about this first. This brings us to the end of this session. Let me just ask one quick question to all of you to finish up. Mila, I'll start with you. What we're here to talk about today, the importance of female leadership in this space, what does that mean to you?
Look, I think females are just so oriented around collaboration, around pushing the agenda towards ambition, and around thinking about how we connect to our people and our community. I think that's going to be a really important superpower to tap into and to leverage in this agenda. We're just going to be essentially relying on those set of characteristics, and I want to sort of think about that as a feminine quality, but one that I hope that we find across all people.
I totally agree. I think collaboration is absolutely key to all of this. At the moment, some of the most amazing collaboration, it's going on not only within businesses, but across industries, across sectors, across value chains. We're going to be most effective when we actually do this at that value chain level and when we do actually engage really widely and broadly. So I think that's the only way we can actually solve for the nature challenges, to be doing it together. It's some of the most inspiring work at the moment is happening with that as the baseline approach. And when you look at the roles between businesses, value chains, the finance community, governments, the investment community, First Nations communities, this can only be achieved when we do unlock that power of working together.
You quoted the statistic before from WEF, which is that at least half of global GDP is moderately or highly dependent on nature. And I heard someone speaking about that recently, and they said something that I really loved, which is like the idea that the other half isn't going to collapse if we lose the 50% of GDP that is moderately or highly dependent on nature is farcical. And I kind of think about that when it relates to women in leadership in this space as well. The idea that we don't need women to drive this agenda is also farcical to me. We make up half of the world's population. But really, nature loss is, as you've rightly pointed out, so connected to other issues around human rights, and ultimately vulnerable populations globally are going to be most exposed to the risks and impacts of climate change and biodiversity loss. And globally, vulnerable populations are tragically overrepresented by women and girls. So this is an issue globally that is going to affect women and girls more than anyone, and particularly women and girls in the developing world and the global south. So this is a women's issue as much as it is an issue of anything else, and I think we need to take that really, really seriously. So we want women to be leading on women's issues, so we have to be really active in this space.
Beautifully said. Could you please join me in thanking Alex, Mila and Sally? I'm sure you're all bursting with questions of your own, and you will get the chance to ask them. We're going to break now for networking, but we're going to pop up here on the screens a QR code, and this will take you through to Slido, where you can pop in a question. So we're going to break. We'll be back here at just over 10 minutes at 9:40. We'll go through your questions then, so please pop anything up there that you would like to ask. Thank you. I'm going to throw these questions out to all of you, and whoever feels it's a competition, arms up first. What messages are getting traction with communities that are resistant to biodiversity conservation?
I can start. I'll try to start that one. I actually think we kind of covered this in the panel already a little bit around and we were talking about it a little bit in the break as well, that the kind of intrinsic connection to nature is the door opener, but then those clear and compelling examples of the financial materiality of nature loss is what is really gaining traction. And we were just chatting in the break as well about I think there is a level of nervousness and uncomfortableness from particularly the NGO community around this idea of quantifying nature and talking about nature as a financial issue. And I totally get that, and I feel that discomfort myself. But the reality is that is gaining incredible traction. The ability to speak the language of the financial community and speak the language of large corporates, which is essentially about financial risk and opportunity, is a hugely powerful tool. And I would just encourage you to lean into that, learn that language, because it will really enable a more open dialogue. And similarly, you touched on capacity and capability around things like having ecologists and biologists and botanists. There is also an onus on corporates and financial institutions to learn the inverse language, which is the language of the environmental movement. So being environmentally literate is also very, very important. And I think those two kind of haven't crossed paths historically, and they really are coming together, which is great to see.
I think the other thing is that your stakeholders will have very different motivating factors. Boards traditionally are twice as motivated by risk as opportunity. CEOs will be interested in supply chain resilience. Marketing teams would be interested in the opportunity to communicate with consumers. Retailers will be interested in how it shores up, supply chain stability. So it just depends on who you're speaking to as to how you actually craft all of them based on the same set of facts, but how that would actually need to be packaged up. I mean, looking at CFOs, for example, where the payback period of nature is traditionally a lot longer than a return on investment that they'd be looking at, access to things like sustainable finance or sustainability-linked loans linked to biodiversity outcomes might actually be more powerfully motivated than talking to them about the cultural benefits that nature delivers to, our workforce, whereas chief people officers would be interested in employee engagement.
I think this question here follows on very nicely from all of this, and you've mentioned sort of very specific motivations and drivers, but is altruism also something to be considered, or is this all very much in terms of shareholder interests or management interests?
Look, altruism is important, and to Alex's point, is the kind of heartstrings piece that does pull people in. But I think the piece, I think, to engage with those communities that might be resistant to it from an altruism perspective is to, again, bring it back to risk and help them understand that there's actually ways in which they can create business value by paying attention. They can do better for their bottom line by actually regenerating and restoring nature. So if that altruism piece doesn't grab them, that's okay, because I think the interdependency between nature and business is something that will grab attention.
I think altruism is a risky strategy because it's not resilient to change. So the minute that resource gets constrained within a business, as with every business as it inevitably does, it's the most vulnerable to being taken out of your program. So I think altruism is important. There's definitely an opportunity, but if that's your game plan, then I'd be worried about the long-term sustainability of that being how you're approaching nature.
Let's talk about public perceptions. There's been a lot of recent commentary in the media that ESG is considered woke, particularly at a time when people have a lot else on their minds. It's a cost of living crisis. People are finding things pretty hard at the moment, so there can be an aversion to pushing forward things that are seen as niche agendas or privileged agendas. How would you respond to that?
At a high level, and I kind of love the idea of a sustainable planet that we can actually exist on is a woke agenda, because I'm not sure what we're trying to do if we're not just trying to do that. But that ultimately what we are striving for is you, and I think you described this so well, is like, in however many years there's going to be 9 billion people on this planet, and we're already far exceeding the resources and stability of the planet, and so many tipping points have been reached that whatever the kind of line of messaging that we need to get people over the line, but ultimately what we are talking about is a sustainable planet that we can exist on as a species. One of my amazing colleagues did a workshop with us recently around this issue of nature and spoke about the concept of humans as an endangered species, because what we are doing right now is making the planet uninhabitable for ourselves, and that to me is at the heart of this issue. Like the concept of net zero, we're not just doing that because it's like a nice idea. It is that we will not be able to exist on this planet as a species if we don't. It is an existential crisis for our species. So if that means that I'm being woke, then maybe I am being woke. But I also just think like it is a way to minimise the importance of this conversation, and I would just, I guess, encourage people to try to come back to the facts and the reality of the urgency of this topic, and time is really running out.
In a nutshell, you're countering the sort of extreme charge of woke with the extreme contention that this is in your self-interest because the planet will cease to exist. And let me ask, sorry, did any of you want to add anything to that?
Only that use the levers that you can within it, I suppose, so that this is a more effective journey when we partner with people who see the world the way we see it, whether that's in your recruitment strategy, making sure that you're not letting people into your organisation who don't see the world the way that you do, or through things like supplier code of conducts, whereby you're clear about your expectation about the way that we treat people and the way that we treat the planet, before you start commercial arrangements with people. I mean, we would definitely share values with everyone right through our value chain, whether that's your banking partners or your insurers or, our suppliers. And I think increasingly what we need to do to sort of avoid sitting there and having to have conversations about whether or not the protection of nature is a woke agenda needs to be, let's focus that energy and intention, instead of convincing those people that this is a real thing, on how we actually direct that focus and energy towards driving change.
Maybe just one other quick comment. I think it is really important to acknowledge that the transition to nature positive and net zero, and ultimately a world where human rights are protected, the onus does have to rest on those who do have the power and privilege to do that. And if we are kind of making this transition in a way that is pushing that burden down onto vulnerable people, impoverished people, etc., then that is not a just way to transition to that future. So what that means is those of us in this room who have that privilege and that power, we need to shoulder more of that burden, and you know, that applies to corporates and financial institutions and to governments. But yeah, I think that the challenge on the woke agenda is a fear that it is going to place more burden on those that can't bear it.
I think that's really well said, and it goes back a little bit to what we were talking about before about the balance between climate, nature and people, and you know, to someone who is sceptical about the ESG agenda or who is sceptical about the nature agenda, I think pointing out that how important it is to actually help those pieces work in concert so that, you know, vulnerabilities are not exacerbated is really important. So rather than appearing as though you're just about one of those, understanding that it's about the balance of those three, and making sure that you're not trampling one by pursuing another, I think will help people understand this is not about pursuing a luxury issue, but about tending to all three.
Another charge that gets levelled sometimes by everyday consumers, which actually I have a lot more sympathy for, is greenwashing. It has been a problem, certainly, on the climate side. How do you make sure organisations can avoid being charged with that and avoid engaging with it at all?
Probably just by making sure that you've done the work and credibly will be the thing that when you're making claims, you'll actually be able to back them up and support them. So I think supporting it with good, high quality work that's very credible is, you know, the foundation for that. But probably looking at it from the other side too, as a community more broadly, we need to make sure that we definitely don't want anyone greenwashing or misleading anyone deliberately, but to give a little bit of grace to organisations who are telling their story, because it's one of the few opportunities that are there for corporates at the moment. And if we take that away for them because they're thinking that, oh, if we say this, then we're doing this on one part of our business or one location and we're not doing it for the whole thing, we might be, you know, I think as long as they're transparent about what they're doing, we need to give them the grace to tell their story, because otherwise we're taking away one of the few positive levers for companies investing in nature.
Yeah, I would completely agree. And in my view, the best defence against greenwashing is telling the truth. So it's actually quite easy. And, you know, one of the kind of core tenets of effective disclosure on sustainability or non-financial matters is balance. So are the disclosures balanced? Are they accurate? Are they fair? And are they truthful? And I think if we can keep coming back to that principle of is this true and a true reflection of what we've done, I think is really important. It's also really fair to acknowledge that we are transitioning from a voluntary, quite disparate, quite complex regime of disclosures around all sorts of ESG issues into a mandatory landscape, and that is going to completely shift the way that disclosure is happening. And yes, there is a big focus on climate right now, and particularly in this country, and that's going to absorb a lot of the attention over the next couple of years. But biodiversity and ecosystem disclosures are very much the next cab off the rank. And, you know, 2 years might seem like a long time away, but the idea of corporates and financial institutions in Australia having to report against regulation around biodiversity and ecosystem services within the next 5 years is a reality. And I think we should all be preparing for that. And, you know, with mandatory disclosure comes all of the regulatory kind of safeguards around that. And, you know, there's no perfect disclosure regime, but we are transitioning. So
2 years is definitely not a long time. And, you know, this piece of work, we often describe it as a ramp up, not a switch on. So if you're waiting, or if you're working with organisations who are waiting for this to become a mandatory nature disclosure to come in, you've really missed that whole opportunity to be where you need to be when it starts, because it actually is a multi-year process for building that understanding and value chain mapping and modelling and financial sensitivity. So knowing it's a ramp up, not a switch on, 2 years is definitely not a long time.
One other thing I'd just offer in this space as you think about managing greenwashing is just to bring a lot of humility to the space. You know, be frank about the things we don't know, be frank about the road that still needs to be travelled. You know, in the guidance that's out there right now around what it means to be aligned with nature positive, you know, corporates are being encouraged not to say that they are nature positive, but that they're contributing to nature positive. So really thinking about that language carefully and thinking about how you're moving in a particular direction and need to reach out and collaborate with others in your supply chain and others among your stakeholders to get there, I think really supports the kind of energy and humility that you bring to the table.
Thank you. The next question is, why do you think government and policy is lagging in providing incentives or tax relief for innovators? And Trisha's left, so feel free to say whatever you like to say.
What a big question. Well, not to go into like political history of Australia too much, but the reality is that we've had, particularly at the federal level, a very complex situation over the last kind of decade or so, and we are now in the process of trying to implement additional or changing regulations. So it takes a long time to undo a legacy of legislation that maybe wasn't fit for purpose, is probably a polite way of saying it. So it's a complex political landscape. The changes of government, I think, we've seen some interesting developments at the federal level, and we'll continue to see those at the state level here in New South Wales. But I think one of the big reasons, and we were chatting about this in the break as well, that when I talk to corporates or financial institutions, they say, oh, this is so hard, why doesn't the government just fix it for us, or can't they just do it, or why don't they just make it mandatory now and then we'll at least know what we're having to do. And then when we talk to government, they say, well, we don't really hear anything from corporates or financial institutions about this, so we're pretty worried that they're going to kind of, come back against it. So it is really important that that message is going both ways, that corporates and financial institutions who do need regulatory certainty and do need better, and strengthened and enhanced regimes around this are giving that message to government, and also not acting in opposition of governments trying to progress the regulatory agenda. And that in reality has been happening a lot in this country, and that is a massive obstacle. So
I'm going to finish on a question about First Nations groups. It was a very powerful response from all three of you with regards to how we think about that philosophically. But this is more about how can corporates or organisations empower First Nations group to be that partner that we want them to be. So the exact wording is, how can First Nation groups be empowered to collaborate and enter into fair partnerships with corporations to achieve nature positive outcomes?
Yeah, this is something I guess I touched on a little bit before. I think, and thinking about Alex's point earlier as well about managing burden as well in the course of this journey, I think it's important to try and listen to First Nations communities and some of the agendas that they're trying to achieve for the land that they interact with, and try and leverage and find some points of commonality and mutual interest, so that there's a sense in which it's rowing in the same direction. There's a sense in which they're not just being consulted, but there's a partnership effort to do things together, to respect their own ownership and connection to the land, and their own agendas and ways in which their knowledge systems and their commitment to the land are being honoured.
The example you gave before as well about treating First Nations people as like equal partners as well, and that often means investment or putting money into things. So bringing them in and making them an equal partner in the process of either halting and reversing an adverse impact on nature, or protecting and restoring nature. And there are some really amazing examples of that happening within corporates around Australia. We just need a massive amount of scale there. We can't just have one-off nice projects in one area that go into a nice community impact report. We need like landscape level approaches and a huge amount of collaboration. And I think that means that we are probably going to have to see a lot more collaboration within industries, so coming together, and also kind of across industries. And it's super interesting, there's some consultation happening at the moment around with the ACCC around how competition law may be a barrier to innovation or developments in the sustainability space. So I think a recognition of how some of the existing controls might actually be barriers is really timely, and I'm looking forward to seeing where that goes from a competition perspective.
I think that highlights one of the sort of overarching themes of what makes nature hard, is that whether it's actually nature risk or engagement with communities, all happens at a local level. Whereas the problem with nature is a scale. We've got to drive this scale, but you can't. We've still got to recognise the innate localisation of where the challenge is and address that. So engage with the communities where we're having an impact, do nature risk assessments and conservation where we are having the impact and where we've got a dependency. But the fact that at a broader level, we still need to do it at scale. And that creates a bit of an inevitable conundrum because it basically means this is a massive task.
And on that, on that note, I might draw this to a close. Thank you so much, everyone, for your questions. Yeah, I'm afraid we couldn't get around to them all because there were so many. Thank you. And apologies for having to merge a few of them as well to get the points across. We are right up on 10 o'clock, which I know is when it finishes, but if we could just ask for 5 more minutes of your time, that would be fantastic. We do have those prizes to give away, and I'd also love to welcome to the stage Catherine Tapley, the Head of Sustainable Finance at ANZ. Her and her team made today possible. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. I'll try and be really quick. There's just so much to unpack on this, and I do hope that you all stay around afterwards to talk about all this inspirational stuff that we've heard today. Before I begin this note of thanks, I would like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land on which we are gathering today. This is Gadigal land. And you've probably worked out by now that I don't come from this land. I come from that wee place across the ditch. And so I would like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the South Island of New Zealand, Ngāi Tahu, where I grew up and where I have created my own very deep connection with the land and the environment as the daughter and granddaughter and great-great-great-granddaughter of generations of farmers there. It's been an absolute pleasure to join you this morning for this event. I think we've been supporting these events with Bush Heritage for a number of years through the very personal connection of my boss, Christina Tonkin, and also an amazing female leader in the environmental space. I'd like to say a very big thanks to all the speakers, starting with Gemma. And guess what? We're going to sing her happy birthday. Yes, we are. So 1, 2, 3, go. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Gemma. Happy birthday to you. To all the speakers, Rachel and Trish, the fabulous panel of these beautiful women here, and just picking up on this theme of female leadership, for me it's come out in spades today. Trish and Rachel connected their stories very personally to their passion for nature, and I think that is something that women do. These women have given you some very practical advice about what to go and do next, because, you know, we've got to get some stuff done so we can pick the kids up and cook dinner. Also a very female leadership trait. So talking of doing, maybe if you can indulge me for a couple of seconds, I might talk a little bit about what we are doing at ANZ. Our purpose is to shape a world where people and communities thrive, and environmental sustainability is one of the things that sits at the heart of how we deliver on that. And it's our commitment to environmental sustainability and a desire to elevate the leadership that women play in the sector that has drawn us to sponsoring the Bush Heritage Breakfast Series for a number of years now. We've been able to sponsor these breakfasts. We've been privy to this rich discussion. We're also furthering the role of women in the environment through our sponsorship of a sustainability scholarship with the Chief Executive Women, and we're scoping the framework and criteria for that at the moment, so watch this space. In addition, and again picking up on another theme about tree hugging, this is the 10th year I've spent in sustainable finance as a banker. Lots of tree hugging like comments over that time, and that not being in any way connected to banking. I'm happy to tell you that I have 35 tree hugging bankers in my team at ANZ globally. There's 4 of them here. And I think those two things are very well connected. Our chief economist is also here, and he's a great voice and advocate for all things climate and nature and the impacts of that from an economic perspective. So I think we're moving on. I think tree-hugging bankers is the next thing, right? Why not? We also do recognise the need to progress a combined climate and biodiversity agenda, given they are intertwined crises, and I think we've heard about that today. We have to solve one, we need solutions to address both, and I think there are another couple of lenses across that, being First Nations and also modern slavery. In April last year, we announced our $100 billion sustainability target by 2030, and we've just released our results this week, and I'm happy to report that 1 year down the track on that target, we have funded just over 20 billion towards that in just 1 year, so making really good progress. We're also heavily invested in supporting the industry of sustainability and highly connected into organisations in addition to bush heritage like the Australian Sustainable Finance Institute and also Australian Land Conservation Association. We have an investment in Pollination, and it's great to see Mila here today. And we work very closely with Pollination, in particular around nature over the last 12 months. So in wrapping up, I'd like to thank Bush Heritage Australia, Rachel, for hosting these events. I'd like to thank Megan and her organising team. So much goes into bringing a small breakfast like this, and well done, by the way, Friday in the CBD of Sydney. Awesome crowd, no one's left yet. Look, it's our pleasure to be involved, and thank you, and enjoy your weekends.
Catherine, thank you so much. We joke about tree-hugging bankers, but quite seriously, we need them. This whole effort, this whole movement needs them. So thank you so much for leading such an impressive team. Right, let's give away some prizes. Prize number 1, which is $100 voucher to dine at Sydney Tower, goes to Camilla Jones on table 3. Where are you? Oh. Well done, Camilla. Prize 2, which is a $150 Endota Spa gift card, table 14, Alison Curtin. Oh, well done. And our final prize, prize 3, which is a $200 Accor Hotels gift card, Emily Knight from table 20. Congratulations and a thank you to all our prize donors. That does bring us up to the end of today's formalities. Catherine did a great job of thanking everybody who needed to be thanked, but let me thank her and her team at ANZ for literally making today possible. Bush Heritage Australia, I'm really glad that Megan got a shout out because she has been working on this event since last year. And we're already halfway through this year, so thank you for all your efforts. To our panel, of course, thank you so much for all your practical and philosophical advice. And to all of you, thanks for being such an engaged audience. Like, you can really tell that you care and that you're taking this on board and you want to make a difference. So thank you for being here, but also for your contribution. Please stay around for some networking. We've got the room till 10:30. Oh, yes, sorry. I left my script somewhere, so I forgot an important one, which is, I'm sure you've all noticed these gorgeous kangaroo paw centerpieces in the middle of the tables. If you have a coloured sticker on the back of your place card, that means you can take it home. Usually we see people squabbling for the flowers at the end of events, and we wanted to stop that. Yeah! Created 24 more winners, which is great. And please do stick around till 10:30 for some networking. Thank you.